They were 9 years old, identical in every way except for the way they smiled. Ellie tilted hers to the left, softer, quieter, while Wren smiled with her whole face, mouth wide, eyes bright, like she was daring the world to look away, and the last time anyone saw them was September 14, 2023, near the base trailhead of Merrow Peak in the Rocky Pines, where the forest grew thick and old and the fog rolled in low like it had purpose, like it knew things people forgot. Ellie and Wren Harper had begged their mother to stop for just a few minutes, said they saw something in the trees, said it looked like a deer with 2 heads, and by the time their mother turned around to tell them enough, they were already gone. No scream, no rustling leaves, just silence, and though the park rangers called in helicopters and bloodhounds and dive teams and psychics and everything short of God himself, they found nothing, not a shoe print, not a candy wrapper, not even a broken twig, and the case quickly became one of those stories people whispered about in grocery stores and online forums, the one about the twins who vanished on a sunny afternoon with no sign of struggle, no suspects, no sightings, just a few seconds of distraction that cost a family everything. But 11 months later, on August 10, 2024, a drone operator named Kyle Jessup was mapping tree damage from an early wildfire near the same region, and when he panned his drone over the northwest ridge of Merrow Peak, he saw something that froze him cold. Movement, human-sized, weaving between trees in a section of forest long declared inaccessible, and though the footage was grainy and the light was bad, you could clearly make out 2 small figures in matching red hoodies, standing perfectly still in a break between the trees, heads tilted, staring straight up into the sky like they knew they were being watched, and before the drone could adjust focus, the screen went black, signal lost, battery full, no interference recorded, just gone, and that footage hit the local PD like a gut punch, because Ellie had been wearing a red hoodie with a patch of a yellow daisy, and Wren's had a white crescent moon stitched by hand, and Kyle's video showed both those things. Not in dream logic or wishful thinking, but clearly, unambiguously, and when the frame was enhanced you could even make out a mark on Ellie's cheek, a scratch that matched a fall she'd taken days before the hike, and suddenly the case that had gone stone cold roared back to life, except this time it wasn't just the parents searching, it was researchers, government surveyors, and a private firm that showed up with black vans and no license plates, claiming to be from an environmental study group out of New Mexico, but their gear looked military, and they didn't talk to press, and when one ranger tried to ask for credentials, they told him the area was under restricted review, ordered by Department Code 7B, an internal designation nobody at the station had ever heard of, but after they showed a paper with an actual federal seal, signed by a judge whose name had been redacted, nobody pushed further, and that night, Ellie and Wren's mother, Miriam Harper, received a call from a blocked number, and when she answered, all she heard was static at first, then a child's voice, soft, frightened, saying, "We can still see the moon. But it's not the same," then silence, and no trace of the call ever hitting a tower, no log, no digital footprint, just like the girls had disappeared again, only this time through a wire instead of the woods. So Miriam took the footage and the call straight to Sheriff Dana Croft, who had been on the case since day one, who had never stopped visiting the trail once a month even after official resources dried up. And she watched the footage 3 times before nodding slowly, face pale, lips pressed together, and she told Miriam, "I need 3 days, no questions, and after that, you'll have my word I'll bring them home or die trying," and true to her word, Dana cleared her schedule, requested backup from an old contact in forestry management, and returned to the Northwest Ridge with a drone of her own, but also with a topographical map from 1972 showing a now-defunct fire access road leading to something marked only as Station 12, and when she asked her contact what that was, he frowned and said, "There's no Station 12, but the map showed it plain as day, a small square etched between 2 ridges, less than a mile from where Kyle's drone lost signal," and on August 13, 2024, Sheriff Croft followed that path, finding where the forest had started reclaiming the road, trees splitting the pavement, roots lifting the earth like veins under skin. And she kept walking until she came to a clearing so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat, and there, in the center, stood what looked like a weather monitoring station, rusted, leaning, its antenna half-snapped, but the door to the bunker beneath it was sealed with new bolts and a fresh lock, and on the ground nearby were 2 small footprints pressed into the dirt, side by side, facing the door, like they'd been waiting. And Dana didn't call for backup, she didn't alert her station, she just stood there, one hand on the latch, one hand on her flashlight, breathing slow, then fast, then slow again, because she could hear something underneath her, not voices, not machines, but a sound like breathing, deep and uneven, and when she pressed her ear to the door she swore she heard someone whisper, "We're still here, but the trees aren't real," and she stepped back fast, heart hammering, and drove straight back to town. But when she got to the station her access card didn't work, and her login credentials had been deactivated, and all calls to the forestry contact went dead, and that night, a black envelope was slid under her front door. Inside was a photo printed on heavy stock, showing two girls standing in a dark hallway, backs to the camera, and in the corner, a reflection in a broken mirror, Dana herself, holding a flashlight, eyes wide in disbelief, but she had never been there, never taken that photo, and on the back of the picture were 5 words written in perfect cursive, "Keep going, but not alone." So she called Miriam again, told her everything, showed her the picture, and they sat at Dana's kitchen table until sunrise, piecing together everything they had, every inconsistency, every deleted record, every name scratched off the maintenance logs from that region of the forest, and one kept showing up again and again. Dr. Byron Kell, a neurologist specializing in sensory deprivation, who had once worked with the Department of Defense in the 90s on something called environmental perceptual filtering, which was supposed to help soldiers adapt to unfamiliar terrain by manipulating their brain's sensory input, but the project was decommissioned after multiple test subjects developed memory fragmentation, hallucinations, and a dissociative state referred to only as looping. And when Dana found a redacted interview transcript hidden in a PDF backup titled Station 12_final_do_not_open, it included a line that made her breath stop cold. Subjects respond to environmental replication for approximately 288 days before cognitive collapse begins. Twins exhibit the highest resilience to looping, possibly due to shared schema and mirrored memory imprinting, and the subject IDs listed were EH and WH, Ellie Harper and Ren Harper, and that meant the girls hadn't just wandered into the woods and vanished. They had been taken, placed, tested, looped, and somehow were still in there, still holding on, and if the footage was real, if the footprints were real, then time wasn't what they thought it was in that place, and the girls weren't just missing, they were still looping, alive, but trapped in a synthetic perception of the forest, a replica running on technology no one was supposed to still have access to, and the drone that saw them didn't just capture movement, it pierced a veil, a break in the simulation, just long enough to remind the world that what had been buried wasn't gone, just hidden, and now that veil had torn again. If you're still reading and you're ready to follow this mystery into the trees, make sure you subscribe, hit like, and comment what you think is behind Station 12, because this story is just getting started, and the loop is still running. The road leading back to Marrow Peak wasn't on any current map, just a faded stretch of cracked asphalt mostly swallowed by forest, the kind of road that feels like it doesn't want to be found. And when Sheriff Dana Croft followed it at sunrise with Miriam Harper in the passenger seat, both women were quiet, holding coffee cups neither had touched, because after what they'd pieced together the night before, footage, maps, environmental patents, and personnel rosters, it no longer felt like a missing persons case, it felt like walking toward a wound in the earth, something festering just beneath the tree line, and as the tires crunched over gravel and pine needles and the GPS flickered in and out, Dana kept one eye on the road and the other on the silent bunker location she'd pinned, Station 12, and when they reached the clearing again, it looked exactly as it had the day before, a rotting tower, a sealed hatch, and footprints still pressed into the dirt like someone, or something, was waiting. And this time Dana came prepared, not with backup from the station, but with a backpack full of equipment borrowed from a friend who used to work underground engineering, thermal cams, carbon monoxide sensors, a portable EMF reader, and 2 headlamps with fresh batteries, and while she worked the lock, Miriam walked the clearing's edge in a slow circle, whispering her daughter's names like a prayer, Ren, Ellie, and when the bolt finally snapped free with a metallic crack, a gust of air rose up from the opening, not stale, but cold, unnaturally so, like it hadn't touched sunlight in decades, and Dana shivered as she pulled the hatch open, revealing a narrow stairwell lit only by the beam of her headlamp and the faint green glow of old emergency paint on the walls, exit painted backwards halfway down, as if someone had been trying to leave from below, and not enter from above, and the deeper they went, the colder it got, sound dropped away, And the hum that started around the seventh step wasn't coming from any machine she could place, it was low. Rhythmic, almost like breath, and halfway down, the EMF reader spiked, lights flashing red, then dead, and Dana pocketed it, kept going, one hand on her sidearm now, though it felt ridiculous down here, like bullets would bounce off whatever made this place hum, and then they reached the first hallway, where the metal shifted from rusted gray to polished white, almost surgical, and the floor was lined with a black rubber that squeaked faintly underfoot, and on the left wall, a mural stretched 10 feet, children standing in a field, all looking up at a perfect blue sky, faces blank, no eyes, no mouths, just silhouettes with hands raised, and in the corner, a label, Environmental Response Schema A3, Revision 7. And that's when Miriam gripped Dana's sleeve, hard, because one of the silhouettes, tiny, to the far right, wore a hoodie with a moon stitched on the sleeve, and beside it, another with a daisy, and the twins were there, part of this painted simulation, not just in the room, but in the design, and they kept moving, past doors with names she couldn't make sense of, imprint bay, sleep deck, rotation hold, and each one had its own sound, whispers behind one, scratching behind another, and from one, the soft lull of a music box playing something off-key and wrong, but the worst was what came next, a room labeled mirror deck, and when Dana peeked inside, the entire ceiling and floor were mirrored, and in the center, a single bed with restraints, and someone had written in the condensation on the far glass, backwards but clear, "Don't blink or it resets," and she slammed the door shut fast, breath catching in her throat, and Miriam looked like she might collapse, but she said, "Keep going, I can feel them. They're close," and they kept walking until the corridor opened up into what looked like a forest, indoors, trees planted in dirt beds under artificial lights mimicking daylight, birdsong piped in over speakers, and a fog machine puffing slow gray tendrils across the mossy ground, and in the middle was a bench, and on it, a pair of small shoes, side by side, clean, untouched by dust, and beside them, a recorder, old and red and cracked, and when Dana pressed play, a voice whispered through static, "We know it's not real, but if we say that out loud, it restarts, and the door moves again, and sometimes we wake up and we're 5, sometimes 11, and last week we were 20 but the mirror said otherwise," and Dana recognized it, Ellie, scared but lucid, and she pressed her other hand to her mouth because the recording ended with a second voice, "Mom, don't be mad, we tried to leave, but the mountain eats the sky." And Dana looked up at the false trees and said, "We're not in a lab, we're inside a loop, something made to keep them quiet," and she remembered the term from the report, mirrored schema, environments that mimic the outside world enough to disorient, then replace real memories with artificial ones, and that meant the girls weren't just being hidden, they were being rewritten, memory by memory, and then the trees parted, and they saw it, a wide room with a curved wall made entirely of glass, behind which a series of figures stood motionless, heads tilted forward, eyes closed, and in the center, a control panel with looping footage of Ellie and Ren from the drone, flickering, pausing, then repeating in reverse, and Miriam ran forward, screaming their names, but the figures didn't move, and Dana held her back, scanning the panel, seeing timestamps that didn't make sense, some from 2023, others from 2019, even one marked 2032, and each one had a corresponding sound file labeled, Iteration X complete, and then a folder, Loop Breach, Subjects A7 and A8, and when Dana clicked it, it showed 3 seconds of glitching footage, Ellie touching Ren's arm, a flash of real sunlight, and then the entire screen distorted like corrupted code, and then the lights flickered. Alarms buzzed faintly, and every figure in the glass chamber opened their eyes at once, not red, not glowing, just wide, terrified, and one of them mouthed the word, "Run," and Dana yanked Miriam backward, just as the corridor behind them sealed with a hiss and the room temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds, and the drone footage began replaying louder, distorted, faster, like the system was trying to overwrite their perception. And Dana screamed, they looped the girls, they looped the whole damn facility, and then a voice, robotic and female, played over a hidden speaker, unauthorized breach logged, schema resetting, sensory override in progress, and Dana reached for her backup battery, yanked the drone remote from her bag, and slammed the override she'd programmed into its firmware earlier, hoping it would trigger the external failsafe, because they had 2 minutes, maybe less, before the entire chamber rewrote itself around them, and as the ceiling began to shimmer like Water. Miriam saw something through the fog, a figure, child-sized, standing at the far edge of the fake forest, holding something in their hands, and when the light flickered again, she saw it was Ellie, holding a drawing, and she whispered, "Mom, it moves the doors when we lie," and Dana pulled Miriam to the ground, shielded her as the lights exploded and the false sky began collapsing inward, revealing scaffolding, wiring, screens. And beyond them, a tunnel, one that led somewhere deeper. If you're still following, you need to subscribe, like, and leave a comment, because what's waiting in the tunnel isn't just the truth, it's everything they were never supposed to find. The tunnel was colder than the rooms above, lined with a copper alloy that didn't reflect light so much as absorb it, swallowing the beams from Dana's headlamp and forcing her to move slower, each step echoing like it didn't want to be heard, and Miriam followed close behind, one hand pressed to the folded drawing Ellie had dropped, a crude sketch of a house split in two, a door standing between two mirror images of a girl, one smiling, one with her face blank, and above it, in shaky handwriting, "If she answers, run," and Dana didn't ask what it meant because she knew by now that whatever facility this was, it hadn't been abandoned, only repurposed, buried beneath corporate filings and redacted reports, a project scrubbed from the Federal Registry but still humming quietly in the dark, and after what they'd seen in the forest room, the looped footage, the child-sized silhouettes waking in unison, it was clear they weren't dealing with a missing persons case, but something much older, and much more deliberate, so when they reached the next junction, a corridor slanting downward at an unnatural angle with a single label painted in chipped white across the steel, S3 contingency hold/no re-entry without clearance, Dana paused, because the air here was different, thicker, like the gravity shifted just slightly, and her stomach rolled as though something in her own memory had just slipped sideways, and Miriam stepped past her without hesitation, whispering her daughter's names like anchors, Ren, Ellie, and the tunnel opened into a rotunda, its domed ceiling inlaid with screens displaying times and dates that didn't match, seasons out of order, years scrambled, and at the center stood a column of glass filled with water, though no wires connected to it. No power source, yet inside floated a set of objects, shoes, a paper crane, a lunchbox, a stuffed bear with one eye, all slowly turning in the liquid like they'd been caught mid-fall and never landed, and Dana's breath caught as she saw her own handwriting on a name tag stuck to the bear's ear, LEC. The one she'd given her daughter the day she started kindergarten, the same one she'd buried in a donation box 6 years earlier, and Miriam reached out to touch the glass, but the water rippled without contact, pulsing faintly in rhythm with a low thrum vibrating through the floor, and that's when the overhead speakers clicked on again, same female voice, calmer now, artificial but shaped to sound nurturing, iteration threshold exceeded. Sequence degraded. Subject reintegration pending, and lights blinked in sequence down the hall to their right, like a trail being illuminated step by step, and Dana grabbed Miriam's hand, forced her to move again, because she knew what the message meant, they were inside an active loop, one degrading faster with each interference, and if they didn't reach the source soon, the entire schema might collapse inward like a house of cards, wiping them from memory along with it, and down the lit corridor, they found another door, this one ajar, humming faintly, and beyond it a room that didn't look like a lab or a forest or a simulation, but a bedroom, 2 twin beds, a nightlight shaped like the moon, a set of books lined neatly on a shelf, and on the far wall, 2 height charts marked with uneven black lines, both reaching roughly 5 feet, Ellie and Ren, definitely, and on the table between the beds sat a cassette recorder, the kind used in therapy, next to a notebook full of short, sharp entries, each one written in a slightly different hand, some childlike, others older, and each started with the same sentence, Day 1, we don't know how long we've been here, followed by lists of rules, don't eat the food unless it tastes wrong. If the room turns blue, face the wall, she's only real if she casts a shadow, and one entry near the back was written in thick, frantic strokes, they said we split, but I still feel her when I sleep. We dream the same hallway. If we both look at the door, it opens, and Dana knew, with absolute certainty, that the loop wasn't just a prison, it was a fracturing mechanism, separating twins, siblings, reflections of a whole into parts easier to monitor, to rewrite, and Miriam collapsed to her knees, sobbing quietly, because the longer she looked at the room, the more she realized it wasn't just a place they had been, it was a memory made physical, constructed from fragments of her own house, the same nightlight, the same Stories on the shelf, even the scent faintly lingering in the air, lavender and chalk, and Dana scanned the walls for cameras, found 3, all dead, and a 4th, still blinking, but not recording, just watching, like it was waiting, and then the notebook flipped itself open in a sudden gust of air, landing on a page with a drawing of a crack in the floor, and beneath it, one sentence, "We left a hole but only when it hums." And Dana listened, and sure enough, faint and distant, there it was, the same vibration as before, but higher now, more strained, and she followed it, found a panel beneath the dresser loose at the hinge, pried it free, and revealed a shaft no wider than a child, but stretching into blackness, and without a word, she reached into her pack, withdrew a microcam on a tether, fed it in, and watched the screen. It showed a chamber below, lined with soft blue light, and in the center, 2 figures, barefoot, one crouched, the other pacing, both with long hair and matching clothes, and one of them suddenly turned toward the camera and smiled, and Dana knew, without a shred of doubt, it was Ellie, and Miriam screamed her name and began ripping the floor open with her bare hands. But Dana stopped her, said no, not yet, we need a way out first, and that's when the power surged, lights flickered, and the room began to dim, sequence degradation accelerating, and the voice returned, louder this time, subjects detected outside assigned schema. Emergency override initiated. Pathways resetting, and the hallway behind them vanished, replaced by a blank white corridor with no doors, and they had seconds now, maybe less, before their reality folded in again, and Dana grabbed the cassette recorder, shoved it into her bag, yanked Miriam toward the crawlspace, and said, "We're going down, now," and as they descended, the hum grew louder, almost melodic, like a lullaby rewritten in reverse. And the crawlspace dropped into the blue-lit chamber from the feed, and Ellie turned slowly, eyes wide, voice quiet, "You're not the first mom we've seen. But you might be the last," and Ren stood too, holding a folded sheet of paper, said nothing, only pointed to the far wall, where a mirror stood with cracks like a spider's web, and something moved behind it, too tall, too thin, and Ellie said, "That's what watches the loop. That's what rewrites us. If it sees us all together, it resets again," and Dana whispered, "Then we can't let it see us," but the mirror had already begun to glow. If you're still watching, still listening, subscribe, like, and comment below. The mirror began to glow, not with light but with something colder, older, a silvery pulsation that seemed to ripple outward like water disturbed by sound, and Ellie pulled Ren behind her as if instinctively shielding her twin from its gaze, while Dana stepped between them, raising the recorder like it could shield them. Like analog might defy whatever this was, and Miriam crouched near the cracked panel they dropped through, looking upward, as if the very walls were shifting again, rewriting themselves with each breath they took, and the hum that filled the air now was louder than ever, not mechanical, not digital, but biological, layered like whispers underwater, and the thing behind the mirror began to move again, not walking, not floating, but phasing in and out of its reflection like a creature made of memory, and Dana realized with a sick snap in her gut that it wasn't the loop watching them, it was the loop personified, a construct of all the iterations that had failed, that had broken, that had fractured consciousness into splinters and sealed them in false rooms and mirrored lives, and now it saw them all together, Ren, Ellie, and their mother, and that was against protocol, against design, and protocol here meant deletion, reset, overwrite, not just of data but of presence, of breath, of being, and the mirror cracked again, and this time a hand reached through, impossibly long-fingered and gray, not skin so much as veil, shifting texture like fog caught in static, and Ellie stepped forward before anyone could stop her, saying quietly, "You promised you'd let us go if we remembered," and the voice that answered wasn't speech, it was pressure inside their skulls, bending thought around sound, saying, "One soul split in two can't return unless it knows its name," and Ellie nodded slowly, then turned to Ren and said, "Do you remember what we were called together?" And Ren, eyes wide, whispered, "Echo," and Dana staggered back because that was the name she'd wanted to give her first child, the name she'd dreamed but never written, never spoken aloud, and somehow, the girls had remembered what never was, what had been denied by birth order, by timing, by bureaucracy, and when Ren said it again, louder, "Echo." The mirror didn't shatter, it reversed, sucked itself inward, collapsing into a pinpoint of dark, and the hand withdrew, retreating like smoke into vacuum, and silence followed, sudden and brutal, and then the floor shifted, a panel fell open, revealing stairs, real ones, metal and rusted, leading upward toward what looked like daylight, and Dana turned to Miriam who stood shaking, staring at her daughters like she was seeing them for the first time, and Ellie said, "It won't chase us now, but only if we don't look back," and so they climbed, all four, step by step, as the hum faded, replaced by birdsong and breeze, and they emerged not into the forest, but into a clearing that hadn't been there before, grass untrampled, sky pale with morning, and behind them, the ground sealed shut again with no sign of a hatch or chamber or mirror, just trees and wind and a sign half buried in moss reading, Boundary Marker 13. Survey site abandoned 1992, and Miriam dropped to her knees and held her daughters, sobbing, but Dana didn't weep, not yet, because she knew what they'd seen wasn't over, just displaced, and back at the motel, she scrubbed the footage, scanned the notebook again, every rule, every entry, and in one near the back, dated 11 days before the drone footage was captured, it read, "If we get out, there will be another. There's always another. They don't build mirrors to reflect. They build them to test," and Dana emailed the audio, the notebook scans, and the still frames of the cracked mirror to Elias Boone, who messaged back one word, "Seen." And attached a location, another site, this one deep in the northwest, where another sibling pair had gone missing 6 months ago, and Dana didn't want to go, didn't want to step into another loop, but she also knew this wasn't just about Ellie and Ren, it never was, it was about the project, and the people funding it, the foundation with too many shell companies and too few survivors, and Miriam took her daughters home, swore she'd never speak of it, but 3 nights later, Ellie left a note on Dana's windshield, "Echo isn't asleep. She's still dreaming," and Dana sat in the driver's seat until dawn, reading the words over and over, and when she closed her eyes, she swore she heard a hum, faint, but familiar, like the sound of a mirror remembering who it was made to reflect. If you're still here, still listening, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. The file wasn't encrypted but it should have been because what Dana found inside the archive Elias forwarded made her stomach twist like it remembered something her mind didn't yet understand, a scanned folder labeled Project, Echo, Protocol Archive /1988 to 1992 with a single line on the front page. Twins process mirror space more completely, and she didn't blink for nearly a minute because it wasn't theory, it was policy, buried under layers of redaction and false medical trials, and listed beneath the statement were locations, site numbers, test iterations, all tied to children born under specific patterns, mostly twins, mostly rural, mostly unnoticed, and the names she saw made her chest tighten, Ellie and Ren Alden, subject set 7B, status, unresolved, reactivated cycle via S3 field trigger, and beneath it, a supervisor's note, dormant signatures reactivated due to external observer intrusion. Wainwright protocol breach, immediate containment suggested, and that name hit her harder than anything because Dana's own last name was Wainwright, and that wasn't coincidence, it was design, and when she scanned deeper, she found her father's signature, Dr. Charles Wainwright, senior field psychologist, Redwood Integrative, assigned 1989 to 1993, and suddenly everything spun inward like the mirror collapsing in on itself, because she hadn't just stumbled into this, she had been grown into it. Her father wasn't just part of the project, he was part of the design. The one who had pioneered the theory that twins could stabilize the loop if one was allowed to fracture and the other was conditioned to forget, and she remembered now how he'd gone missing in 1994 and her mother never spoke of it again, only said he worked with people who studied memory, and Dana used to think that meant Alzheimer's or trauma, not this, not the engineering of memory as architecture, and Elias called her again, voice quiet, saying, the location they used last, before they shut the program down. It's still there. Silo Base 4. Hidden under a decommissioned ranger station west of Meadowhook, and Dana didn't hesitate this time, she packed fast, didn't tell Miriam, didn't tell the twins, just left a single message on her desk, if I don't return in 48 hours, send Elias everything, and the road to Meadowhook was barely a road anymore, more gravel and fog than map and when she arrived. The ranger station was boarded shut but behind it a hatch was hidden beneath broken planks and an old canoe, and when she pried it open, the air that escaped was thick, like silence boiled, and the stairs led down into another layer of the program, untouched since the early 90s, wires still strung, clipboards still on hooks, the smell of chemicals and mold thick in her lungs, and at the lowest level she found the observation deck overlooking a glass room, and inside were 2 chairs. Twin chairs, bolted to the floor, and on the wall a mural half finished, painted in a child's hand, showing trees, a lake, a mirror, and 2 figures walking into it while a third watched from above, faceless and tall, and Dana stepped back because in the reflection of the glass she saw movement, not behind her but beside her, her own reflection, blinking out and returning out of sync, like a skipped frame in a film reel. And then a voice from the intercom crackled, "Cycle incomplete, subject E." Still broadcasting, and the name E made her freeze. Ellie, echo, or was it herself? Because what if she wasn't the observer, what if she had been the test, reinserted into her own loop to verify fracture behavior, and then the lights cut out, the hum began again, lower now, like it had followed her, and a screen lit up with a single word, "Repeat," and she ran, stumbling up the stairs, past old signage and faded maps, out into the clearing again. But the sky had changed, slightly, like the clouds were reversed, and her phone showed the correct date, but the inbox had messages she didn't remember sending, voice memos from herself saying things like, "They're looping you through observational recursion," and, "Don't look directly at the mirrored trees," and the worst one, "If you hear the humming again, it's already started over," and Dana stood there in the wind, phone in hand, knowing something had rewritten the edges of her world, because when she opened her call log, there was one saved voicemail from an unknown number, time-stamped 10 minutes before she ever entered the base, and the voice on it was her own, whispering, "You were never just the observer, you were part of the cycle, one twin lost. One twin sent to retrieve, loop until learned, loop until loop," and she turned slowly, saw her reflection in the station's cracked window blink out again for half a second, and in that blink, she saw her daughters, not in the now, but younger, not yet taken, not yet fractured, just watching her from across the mirror, and then a sound rose behind her like footsteps, like memory itself turning the page, and the wind shifted again. If you're still with us, subscribe, like, and comment. The final drive was the quietest of Dana's life because silence meant the program hadn't noticed her deviation yet, or worse, that it had and was waiting to close the loop once she reached the end, and her hands shook not with fear but a sick clarity because every piece now made a shape she couldn't unsee, a system built not to trap children but to fracture time itself through them, to treat twins as temporal mirrors able to refract and reflect traumatic memory in a way that rendered it repeatable, pliable, programmable, and as she passed the faded redwood integrative sign now mostly overgrown and rust-pitted with age, she realized the buildings hadn't been abandoned, only hollowed out, shell-staged to let people believe they'd moved on when underneath, beneath every forest trail and ranger station and drone-captured treetop, the grid still pulsed and waited for one more sequence to complete, and the coordinates led her to a spot she remembered from a childhood photo but hadn't placed until now, a field near the base of a granite ridge where her father once stood between her and a girl she didn't recognize until she saw the date. And that girl was Ellie Alden, barely 5, her hair in twin braids, and on the back of the photo was a scribbled note in her father's handwriting, "Subject he shows high phase recall/observe Dana for response latency," and it hit her so hard she fell to her knees in the field because she wasn't just close to the truth, she was born in it, not a rescuer but a backup, a redundancy in case Echo failed. And when she stood again she scanned the ridge wall and saw it, the entrance hidden behind a veil of vines and false stone, sealed with a keypad long dead from rust, but the dirt beside it was loose like someone had recently passed through, and when she pressed her hand to the stone the wall gave way slightly, enough to slip inside, and the chamber behind it was unlike the others, no rust, no rot, it was preserved perfectly, lit by old generator lines still humming faintly, and a tunnel sloped downward in an impossible spiral that didn't seem to shift physically but disoriented her nonetheless. Like time turned horizontal, and as she moved deeper voices returned, not from her head but from the chamber walls where tiny speakers embedded in the concrete whispered sequences in overlapping tones, "Subject W, reactivation at 11 months achieved. Subject D, present anomaly confirmed. Subject E, waiting." And she didn't want to understand what that meant, but part of her did already, because when she reached the lowest room a mirror covered the wall, floor to ceiling, and reflected not her image but flickering stills of old test footage, children speaking in loops, eyes wide, whispering things like, "We didn't leave, we woke up," and, "They called it a trip but it was always a trial," and behind the mirror was a final door, unlabeled, and when she passed through it she found herself in a room that Felt like a memory. Her childhood bedroom, every poster correct, every creak familiar, except the window showed not daylight but the forest clearing from above, drone view still live, which meant someone was watching, or something, and at the center of the room a chair faced a single screen and that screen showed a video file queued but paused, labeled Echo Completion Sequence, and beside it a handprint scanner glowed faintly red. And she hesitated only a second before placing her palm on it, and the screen flared to life showing Ellie Alden's face, older than in the photos but not as old as she'd be now, speaking slowly like she'd been waiting for someone to finish a sentence she started a decade ago. If you're watching this, you're part of it too, you just didn't know it yet, but you were always the key, and the footage shifted to show Ellie in the chamber with the bus. Yes, the bus from the forest but clean, intact, running like it had never rusted, and children sat inside it calmly, each with a headset, eyes closed. And Ellie continued, they kept us here not to study what we saw but how we could keep seeing it, how to make reality rewind without breaking, but it did break, and they looped us again until one of us remembered enough to send a message, and Dana felt cold because the messages had all started when she touched that drone, when she stepped into that loop, and Ellie looked directly at the camera now and said, "You're the last link, Wainwright Protocol means. You're both test and key," and behind her, in the screen, a figure moved, blurry, tall, face obscured, but not unfamiliar, and Ellie whispered, "I kept him here, your father, in the loop, because I couldn't let him finish the sequence," and Dana's legs nearly gave out because the figure stepped forward and yes it was him, her father, aged and thin, eyes blank, mouthing words she couldn't hear, and Ellie's voice returned, "If you want to end it, you have to finish the loop. But ending it means forgetting again, for everyone, even me, even the twins, or you can keep it, remember it, and let the program live." And the screen flickered off, final, and the chair behind her unfolded to reveal a second scanner and a headset waiting, and she stood for a long time, tears slipping down her face, because she knew either choice was loss, one ending the cycle but erasing the story, the other preserving memory but keeping the loop alive, and in that room, alone with reflections and echoes and the last image of her father frozen in time, she chose, slowly, deliberately, pressing her hand to the second scanner and whispering, "For them, not for me," and everything went white and then gone, not silence but soft static, not darkness but blank, and when she woke, she was on her porch, sun rising, no cuts, no dirt, no memory, and the twins called to her from inside like they had always been there and always would be, and her inbox was empty, her call log blank, her photos untouched except one new file on her desktop. Forest_Echo_Final.mov, and she opened it, unsure why, and saw a drone shot of the forest, a small clearing, and a bus, rusted and waiting, and as the camera pulled back a voice whispered faintly, "One stayed so the others could wake up." If that ending gave you chills, if you want more stories like this, subscribe, like, and comment below, because the echoes are never really gone.